Next up, we have Fight Club, released October 15th, 1999, written by Chuck Palahniuk, starring Brad Pitt, Edward Norton, Helena Bonham Carter, Meatloaf, Zach Grenier, and Jared Leto. This film had a paltry box office of $100 million worldwide on a budget of $63 million. A depressed insomniac meets an impulsive soap maker named Tyler Durden. To escape their mundane lives, together they form an underground fight club that flourishes into something beyond a group of like-minded members.
We're about to break the first and second rules of Fight Club and talk about Fight Club.
We're awful members.
This is a movie that for me has been constantly shifting in and out of like my top 10 personal favorite movies all time since I was like 11 the first time I saw this movie. I think it's one of the most important films possibly around the turn of the century. 1999 was an incredible year for movies, and this is one of the best that year.
For 1999, I actually made a list of the great movies that came out that year.
Can we hear the list? Yeah.
Ready for this?
1999 films.
Okay. Fight Club, The Matrix, The Sixth Sense, The Talented Mr. Ripley, The Mummy, Austin Powers, American Beauty, The Iron Giant, Magnolia, The Green Mile, The Insider, Big Daddy, Being John Malkovich, 10 Things I Hate About You, Eyes Wide Shut, Toy Story 2, Girl Interrupted, Office Space, Sleepy Hollow, American Pie, and Star Wars The Phantom Menace. What a year for movies.
Absolutely insane, dude.
It's crazy.
Absolutely insane.
Easily the best year that decade. Could be the best year for 20 years.
Maybe the best year ever for film. And again, one of the most important films in turn of the century in terms of innovation, creativity, and style. And it showed that people really wanted this like gritty, dark, challenging story in a realistic fashion, but also the fact that the entire film is basically a commentary in ways on our consumerist society that we live in, that we're obsessed with, and that we'll never leave probably.
Yeah, exactly. And also, I think this movie kind of has a way of speaking to men in masculinity sense, where there are lots of films and books that come out regarding women and the things they go through in life, and like something like Sisterhood of the Traveling Pants, where these women get together and share their experiences throughout life. And I don't think there have been that many movies about this kind of thing for men. An example is Dead Poets Society. And I think Fight Club embraced that idea of discussing what it's like to be a man in the modern world, and especially in a Western civilized country like America, and what that's done to masculinity, how masculinity is used in different ways, and how it's repressed in many ways. And I think that this film spoke to an entire generation of men who were kind of confused about their place in the world.
Yeah, the film is full of macho masculinity, violence, and destruction. Of course, you can't blame people for looking at this film on the surface and seeing those themes and thinking that those are the main motives of the film and they see those as weaknesses for the film. But Fincher, he crafted Fight Club so expertly that despite all these, whether you want to call them toxic masculinity and themes of violence and all of that, if you want to call that weaknesses, you can't help but appreciate the filmmaking at the same time. It's really well made. It's stylish. It's colorful. It's well paced. It's violent. It's relatable, and the entire film, kind of like you were talking about earlier, it seemed to connect and resonate with so many young men. It's sort of like a coping mechanism for a lot of depressed and lost men out there in Western civilization, which really kind of what Fight Club is all about in general, and not the movie, but like the Fight Club in Fight Club. That's what it is.
Yeah.
This episode of Raiders of the Lost podcast is also brought to you by Manscaped, the leaders in men's below-the-waist grooming. Manscaped offers precision-engineered tools for your comfort, obsesses over their technology developments to provide you the best tools for your grooming experience. Manscaped has been awesome. They sent us their performance packages. Their rep Kyle has been great. They're sending us even more stuff coming this week. We'll let you know what it is when it shows up. I'm pretty excited to get it.
It's a great product and a great brand. Check them out.
Yeah, we have their luxury lawnmower groomer, which is the greatest clippers I've ever used in my life. I don't know what I've been doing using these things at CVS that cost $12. My life has changed. Yo, it has a light and it's waterproof. You can trim in the shower and everything. Again, Raiders of the Lost at checkout for 20% off and free shipping. And everybody, grooming is a necessary part of life. The holidays are coming up. Whether you're a guy, a girl, whatever, if you need a gift for somebody, if you have men in your life, brothers, siblings, cousins, a father, aunts, uncles, whatever, I highly suggest getting them something from Manscaped.
And I think what's happened is it's a commentary on the fact that in modern society, it's not really suited to the basic instinctual aspects of masculinity. And I think men in modern societies lost the understanding of how to use masculinity to their advantage. And that's why in this film, they resort to the worst parts of masculinity: aggression, violence, destruction. Like those aren't the only aspects of masculinity. There's a lot of good, beneficial aspects to masculinity. And I think that, and also it's depicted in the fact that men aren't sure of their masculinity and how to use it, and they've kind of lost it in a way. And that's characterized in the testicular cancer group, where these men have literally lost their testicles and they've lost the biological connection they have to being a men and masculinity itself. So their masculinity is taken away from them. For example, Meatloaf's character, through the hormone therapy, he's developing characteristics that are more female than male, especially with his breasts that he's developing from the hormone therapy. So a lot of the film is a commentary on men losing their masculinity and not understanding how to get it back or how to use it in a positive way. And also it alludes to the idea when Tyler Durden says we're a generation of men raised by women. So we don't know good examples of masculinity to use for ourselves.
In the main characters in this film, Tyler Durden and the narrator, we never know his name, it's just narrator. They have no father figures in their life, and they're sort of looking for a father figure, and they end up kind of creating Fight Club as a sense of camaraderie to build father figures for all these lost men.
I think it's more so, for that, but also the narrator, I think that he looks to Tyler as a sort of father figure for himself.
Yeah, I can see that too.
Because there's this really interesting thing Chuck Palahniuk describes about his book, where there's this phenomenon where for young men, when boys become men, obviously if they're lucky enough to have a dad, that's their initial father figure. But then when they grow into adulthood and leave the home, they look for a second father figure. And it could be like the master of a craft that they apprentice for, or a teacher or a professor or an artist, or any kind of male figure that they can look up to in another way as a father figure. And so I think Edward Norton's character, the narrator, is looking for that father figure, the second father figure in his life. And then through Tyler Durden, he sees not so much someone who is of like high moral caliber or sets good examples, but it's more of a desirous quality where I want to be like that. And that's why I'm gravitating towards him, because he is how I want to be.
Exactly. I think it's a mistake to look at this film on the surface and see the destruction, the mayhem, the anarchy, and not realize the subliminal messages and underlying tones, which are actually, it's about identity, it's about balance, it's about life, it's about discovering your path and knowing what you want and having the courage to take risks and aspire to be something, which basically all these characters have these immense transformations. Even Tyler Durden makes immense transformations, where Project Mayhem, it starts as Fight Club, and you think it's all about this destruction, anarchy, but he has a master plan, which we'll get into in a little bit.
I think you're absolutely right. It's a great point you made, where I think a lot of people look at this film with a common misconception about, I think they see this film as promoting anarchism and rebellion and nihilism, but in destruction, and they see this movie as like rebelling against capitalism, rebelling against Western civilization, and trying to cause destruction. But what happens is that ends up being the wrong way to carry out how you feel, and that's evident when the narrator eventually overcomes this and changes in the last act of the movie, where he tries to stop what's been put into motion, because he realizes that chaos and anarchy, it might seem sexy and cool when you're young.
And nihilism,
it's good, sounds great, and it's fun to embrace when you're young. But when you mature and you become an adult, you realize that anarchy and nihilism and chaos has no place in the world, and we need order and civilization in order to thrive as human beings and to live peaceful lives and to be able to withstand one another. And so I think that's the common misconception a lot of people have with this movie and what it's really trying to say.
This movie is iconic, and it's one of the most talked about films in the last 2 decades, and probably still will be for years to come. And Brad Pitt, obviously, as Tyler Durden is incredibly memorable and iconic. And I mean, you got Tyler Durden on your desk right there, your
Right
little
there.
Funko right there. People love Brad. It's a very flashy, sexy role for him. He's absolutely shredded for no reason. And it's one of the best he's ever done. And he's so charismatic on camera. He's perfect as Tyler Durden. But he was already a star. You know, Brad Pitt was a big name. Edward Norton was a very good actor. But this really put him on a different level and made him almost equal with Brad Pitt in terms of like A-list status and national or international star.
Yeah, Edward Norton had gotten an Oscar nomination for his first film. And so he had become well known in the industry, but still worldwide and across the country, he wasn't a household name until this movie came out.
Yeah. And you're meant to identify not with Tyler Durden, you're meant to identify with the narrator in this film. You know, the narrator is the surrogate for us. He's trapped in this world that he hates. He's shackled to this consumer society. On the surface, he tries to look successful and like he has his life together with his IKEA apartment, which he subscribes to. But he really is a shell of a man. He's a shell of a human. He's hollow on the inside. He tries to fill his life with consumer goods, but he's just like his fridge. You know, he has a fridge full of condiments and no food. How embarrassing.
There's nothing substantial about him, just like how there's nothing substantial in his fridge.
He's truly empty, soulless, and like many people, he hopes that these material items will complete him and will fill his life with meaning.
But I think that's the wrong way to look about it for him, because he goes on that speech about how we're all copies of copies of copies. Like, we're all the same. We're all doing the same bullshit, living out the same lives until we die. And I think that it's a contrast to he's buying all this stuff that he doesn't need as a way to make himself feel better about his life so he doesn't have to deal with his life. But the stuff he's buying are literally copies of copies. Because, like, if you want to buy potato chips, walk into the store, there's 20 different brands of potato chips, different kinds. And it's like there's really no big difference between them. They all pretty much taste the same. The differences are just the branding and the bag. Same thing with a chair. You can buy a chair which looks like 1,000 other chairs, or a couch. So he thinks he's upgrading his life and making himself more unique by buying all this stuff. But ultimately, he's just buying more copies of other copies to add to his life, which is a copy of a copy. So he's in this cycle of perpetuating this numbness within society where you've lost any connection to like spirituality, connection to nature, connection to other people or in the world, and meaning in your life. And you've just been overtaken by consumerism, by creating a facade of representation of yourself and losing the humanity within inside of you.
And he suffers from intense insomnia, and he can only sleep by feeding off the emotions and pain of other people at these learning to cope meetings he goes to. And in doing this, he's borrowing their pain, he's borrowing their trauma. This lets him sleep. It's the only way that he can get to bed at night. Otherwise, he's up all night watching TV and just trying to fall asleep.
Yeah, I think that when he goes to these meetings and the reason why he's able to sleep is because he's able to cry at these meetings, and he's able to not just borrow their pain, but also it gives him an outlet to really express the pain he has inside. He's not dying from cancer, but he has a cancerous problem within him. And these groups allow him to let that out and emote. And since he's actually feeling and emoting and experiencing for the first time in these meetings, that's why he's finally able to fall asleep, because he's finally living.
Until Marla shows up. And Marla comes to these meetings too and basically ruins his ability to cry and feel and emote, because he can't do it if there's another person there that's not suffering from these illnesses. And she even goes to the testicular cancer one too, which he thinks is ridiculous. And Marla, she's a different form of lost than the narrator. She mostly goes to the meetings probably out of boredom. She says it's cheaper than a movie and the coffee's free. And Marla's kind of a underlying key to this entire film. And she's in a way a different solution to the narrator's problems if he follows this path with Marla rather than what he does with Fight Club and Project Mayhem.
I think that Marla also goes to the meetings because when the narrator is explaining to her why he goes, she interrupts him and says, because they actually listen to you. And so I think they're both going to these meetings because it's the only instance in their lives where they're actually able to connect with other people on a personal and emotional and intimate level whereas the rest of their lives are just filled with numbness and disconnect.
Yeah. I think Marla wants a deep connection, like, wants a relationship. She's wearing that wedding dress, the bride's dress for who knows what reason that she found for like $4.
And also the narrator has that dream about her in the Arctic cave with the penguin and Marla sitting there. So she's begun infecting his mind, and he's attracted and desirous of her, and he doesn't want to admit it.
And now there's a specific point in the narrator's life and story where Tyler Durden enters his life. And this is on the plane because the narrator is a traveling analyst and works for this insurance company for car companies. And he meets Tyler Durden on a flight. And for me, this is probably because now his mind's kind of mentally checked out, and he needs to try to figure out a way to cope with everything and cope with his depression and cope with his insomnia. And we talked about earlier that his desire for a father figure. And of course, we all know the twist ending of Fight Club, so we might as well just get it out of the way now.
Yeah, we can't really properly talk about the movie anyways.
Yeah, so Tyler is the narrator, and the narrator is Tyler. The narrator created Tyler to cope with his life and try to find meaning in life and try to Tyler, I think he says, is everything that he wants to be, looks like he wants to look, fucks like he wants to fuck, acts like he wants to act.
Yeah, and so the narrator, he is so numb, and he has failed to act throughout his life. He's never truly lived, and he's held down by this kind of, I guess you could say it's a fear of ever doing anything, and he's just a cog in the system. He's become just like another mindless cog in the machine.
Whereas Tyler's free. Yeah. Tyler doesn't have a job. Well, he has part-time jobs, but his job doesn't control him.
And so Tyler is a manifestation of all the things that the narrator desires and wishes he could be.
Yeah, and like I said earlier, Tyler's evolution is probably just as drastic as the narrator's throughout the film. And Tyler at first seems very nihilistic, and he tells people and his followers, you're all worthless scum. You're the same organic dying matter as everything else. But his plans evolve and his philosophies evolve, and basically what he wants to do is Fight Club, then which turns into Project Mayhem. He wants to free people. He wants to pull them out of their trapped lives, and they're trapped to corporations and money and debt and jobs, and he wants to free people. He wants to hit the reset button on the world. He wants to liberate the population.
That's true. I also think that those are the intentions, but also the irony with Tyler and Project Mayhem is that he ends up creating this society and this group, which becomes like an organized cult, where at first Fight Club was about... So first of all, let's talk about Fight Club works because when the men enter this fight, they experience pain, and they also experience the risk of death when they fight. And the reason why they become addicted to Fight Club is because these feelings are things that make them feel alive for the first time in a long time, because they're like the narrator, they become numb. And so fighting gives them, makes them feel like they're living again. And so that's why they gravitate towards Fight Club. And so I think initially the idea of Fight Club was about setting people free and showing them how to feel again. But then Tyler changes his theory and the way about it, where he creates Project Mayhem, which becomes an anarchist group. And then the members of Project Mayhem end up being mindless copies of copies, where they all wear all black, they shave their heads, they stop thinking for themselves, they follow his orders without question. So they try to, by escaping the mindless, numbing copies of copies in the world and being just another ant on the hill, they ironically became more copies on copies within Project Mayhem.
So they fought conformity with more conformity.
Exactly.
And they also even get corporate sponsorship, which is pretty funny too and ironic.
Yeah, so I think Tyler started out with wanting to free men, and then it ended up being more of like a fascist movement.
And just to keep going on Fight Club and what it really is and means is, I also think that the whole point of the fighting is to, in order to evolve and change, you have to, in their sense and in their perspective, is destroy what you once were. And you have to tear that part of you, what you were before, apart. You have to break down what you once were in order to like rise up from the ashes and become a new person and have a new path. And I think this is really symbolized with the chemical burn, which is one of the most important moments in the film, because it's one of the most important moments for the narrator, because in order to make his new life, he must strip away his old one. And the chemical burn, it'll always be a reminder that his life is happening at that moment. His life isn't happening in his past. It's not happening with what he's going to have. And it's the first step that Tyler says to enlightenment, is to realize who you are, accept who you are, and that's the only way to grow. This episode of Raiders of the Lost podcast is brought to you by our friends at movieposters.com. Use coupon code Raiders15 to get 15% off your order today. Movieposters.com is the best site to get your movie posters. It has been for years. They've been great to work with. Thanks so much to David for hooking it up with our posters. They also sponsor our giveaway contest, which we do every month. They offer great options for original designs, framing, backlight, canvas, and even plaque designs. Use coupon code Raiders15 to get 15% off your order today at movieposters.com.
Bro, I also think that the soap scene is used as a way to eliminate your fear of death, because Tyler says in that moment, you have to accept one day you are going to die. And so I think that in order to properly live, you have to eliminate your fear of dying, because it's going to happen. It comes for us all, and it's inevitable. And if you obsess over death, you're never going to fully learn how to live. And so I think Tyler's trying to teach the narrator to just let go of the fear of death.
Yeah, and the whole concept of Tyler selling soap, like that's his profession. Like, what does that mean? What does that symbolize? And you can look at it as the cleansing of somebody, or the cleansing of life, and getting rid of your past to move on. And the fat that they use symbolizes excess, obviously, and they get it from rich people. He's selling their fat, rich asses back to themselves. So it's kind of like this cycle that he's creating. And again, that's, I think, the point of the soap and why they make and sell soap.
And I also think that, so we talked about the reason why the narrator created Tyler was as a way to experience all the things that he wishes he could do and be and act as. And I think the main catalyst for him creating Tyler is meeting Marla. So I think Marla is the reason why the narrator creates Tyler Durden, because since he becomes attracted and desires Marla intimately and sexually, and he is incapable of actually opening up and living and experiencing things in his life as a narrator, he creates Tyler as a way to have sexual, intimate, and emotional connection with Marla. So I think that's the main reason and catalyst for him creating Tyler.
And I think also maybe because Marla prevented him from sleeping. Maybe that's also why too.
I think it's because they make that deal about switching things, so then after they make that deal, it's okay. But the fact that she's showing up in his dream fantasy meditation is showing that he wants her, and so he creates Tyler. Because Tyler, the flashes of Tyler, none of that starts until after he meets Marla. So she's, I think, the driving catalyst for the creation of Tyler Durden.
Although you can catch glimpses of Tyler, because Fincher puts little quick frames of him throughout the first act of the film before he starts coming into picture, which obviously you probably wouldn't really notice it the first couple of times you watch this movie, but you can look them up and find the frames where Fincher put Tyler Durden in frame before he's even comes into existence in the movie.
Yeah. And also this movie deals with the idea that falling victim to untapped potential, because Tyler is a representation of the narrator's potential as a person. Because if the narrator can create this fake person who has the potential to be all the things that the narrator wants to be, then deep down the narrator has the ability to do all those things and be that person. And so I think Tyler Durden is a metaphor for the untapped potential within yourself that you never set free.
And that is perfectly shown in the scene where they're at the convenience store and he holds the clerk at gunpoint, and he asks him, what do you want to be with his life? What do you want to do? Did you want to work at this convenience store? And then the convenience store clerk confesses that he wanted to be a veterinarian. And so Tyler steals his license and sells him. If in 6 weeks he's not on his way to become a veterinarian, he's going to kill him. And this scene is really important because of what you just said in terms of the potential and ambition of people who squander that and ignore that, what they can become if they get motivated and get on the right path, which we talked about in the beginning of this segment, how this film is also about finding your path in life if you look underneath all the surface of it. And that he says the next day, that will be the best day of that person's life. His breakfast will taste better than any breakfast we'd ever have, because now he's on this forced path of potential and ambition, and now he's going to change his life because of Tyler Durden.
Exactly. So it's actually a really cool theme right there. And then also, obviously, one of the most known themes about this movie is the attack on capitalism and consumerism. One of the best way that David Fincher pokes fun at capitalism is by inserting a Starbucks cup into nearly every single scene of this film. And if you look closer, you can see a cup of Starbucks in almost every shot.
So the relationship between Tyler and the narrator becomes strained when Tyler basically leaves the narrator out of specific operations in Project Mayhem, keeps him in the dark, and kind of just starts disappearing at times. And
yeah, the narrator starts like discovering what's happening.
And he becomes jealous of other characters in the film in part of Project Mayhem because he doesn't know yet who Tyler Durden really is.
And in terms of jealousy, that's the main reason for why he so viciously assaults Jared Leto's character and beats him to a pulp, because they purposely made Jared Leto have similar hair to Brad Pitt in this film, I think to make him look kind of like Tyler Durden, and also Tyler gives him a little bit of attention, which makes the narrator jealous. But ultimately, if you think about it, it's the narrator who's giving Jared Leto attention because Jared Leto looks like Tyler Durden, which is why I think the narrator is giving him attention. So he's mad at himself for giving him attention, which leads to him beating him to an absolute pulp in their fight.
Yeah, and if you actually look at different parts of the film like that, you can see where, Edward, the narrator, is Tyler Durden, and he kind of acts very selfishly because he's the leader of this group. And, in these fights, they say it's very specific, there's just one man, two men to a fight, and they try to keep everything fair and balanced, but he takes advantage of Jared Leto's character and beats him to a pulp excessively. He also breaks the rules when he lets Bob into Project Mayhem, even though he doesn't really fit the qualifications of it. So he kind of ends up, he doesn't realize he's doing it. He's breaking his own rules constantly throughout the film.
And I think the biggest hint that there is actually only one person is when Marla's over the house and the narrator's having breakfast in the kitchen, and then Marla comes in and they have a rude conversation, and then Tyler's in the basement telling him what to say and not to mention him, and telling narrator how to respond. And it's clearly from Marla's point of view, if you watch it for the second time, you understand that narrator is the only person in the house besides her. She's the one who had sex with her last night, and so there's no other person in the house with them. And so Tyler's telling the narrator what to say, and they're never in the room at the same time as Marla. So Marla's the only character. They'll be in the same room in the Fight Club sequences and with the Project Mayhem, but with Marla, the pair is never in the same room with her at the same time. I think it's because he has an emotional connection, an intimate connection to her.
And the narrator eventually starts to kind of figure things out where he's tracking Tyler because he's disappeared. He can't find him, and he's finding fight clubs all over the country, in every city, every major city he goes to, and no one talks to him about it, and they're all secretive, and he seems to be left out of this big master plan. And it's not until he's in the hotel where he finally realizes that Tyler Durden is him when he's on the phone with Marla. And he asks Marla if they have had sex, and he asks Marla to tell him what his name is. And she says, Tyler Durden. It's just like the planes where it's like, we've lost cabin pressure, and then everything goes slow, and then Tyler appears in the hotel room, and he's got a new look.
And obviously, this is one of the best twists in cinema history, especially the first time you watch this. If you don't know the twist, it's great. And now we can look at Tyler as the main antagonist of the film rather than one of the protagonists. And now the narrator realizes that Tyler when he realizes Tyler was his creation, he's understanding that everything that Tyler's doing is wrong and it's excessive and it needs to be stopped.
But this plan has gone too far, and Tyler has prepared for this, and that's why none of the members of Project Mayhem communicate really with the narrator. They don't do what he says, even though he's clearly a founder. Even when he admits that he's Tyler Durden, even to the cops when they're all like, "You told us you'd say that.
We gotta get your balls."
Yeah, we gotta get your balls. You told us to say this. We gotta say, sir, this is really sending a strong message to the Project Mayhem.
I'm a fan of your work.
And so Tyler prepared for the situation because he knew at some point the narrator was going to connect the dots and realize that they were the same person.
And then, so the narrator, when he confronts Tyler, it's him confronting himself. And so Tyler represents the fantasy version of the narrator, which is unrealistic and not true to who he can truly be. It's everything he wants to be, but that's kind of a lie. And so he has to destroy this fantasy version of himself in order to move on.
Which leads us to the end. And, well, actually, I love the fight scene between the two
fight
of them
scene's
because
awesome.
it's so fun. And obviously, the narrator is no match for Tyler Durden.
But when they cut to the security cam footage and then you just see Edward Norton's body being pulled around and beaten up, it's
by
great.
himself, and
Yeah.
he just throws himself over the stairs and everything. It's pretty
amazing.
intense, and it's very cool. And then he finally gets to the top of the building, and Tyler lets him in on the entire plan. But, you know, the power of the relationships is starting to transfer to the narrator because he's starting to understand more that he's really in control of the whole entire situation. And the only way that he can stop Tyler and to gain full control is he has to, in a way, destroy Tyler. And he does this by sticking the gun in his mouth and blowing a hole through his cheek, which for him kills Tyler Durden.
Yeah, and so he's killing that fantasy of himself, and now he's just the narrator. And I think that from this moment on, he's not going to be Tyler, but he's still going to be a free version of himself compared to what he was in the first act of the movie. He'll never go back to that person, but he's going to be a new version of himself.
And he seems like he's now going to follow the path with Marla and see what that part of his life leads to, and develop that situation.
Yeah.
And at the end, does he find meaning in all the chaos? Does he find meaning in destroying all those credit card company buildings? Or does he find meaning and empathy by choosing this new life with Marla? Because he holds her hand while the buildings collapse.
Yeah, it could be he originally was seeking destruction, but now he's probably seeking a connection now.
He's learned to be free. He's overcome his fears, his loneliness, his emptiness. And this is a fantastic ending to a terrific movie, and it's iconic. We have Marla and Tyler, who we now know is really Tyler, holding hands while they watch all these skyscrapers blow up and collapse, and that song by the Pixies is playing, and it's just super memorable. We all love it, and it's awesome. It's a great movie.
And ironically, as loved and revered as this film is now, it was an absolute box office failure, and it only made $36 million on its release in America, which is a huge bomb because the budget was twice that. But as we know, this film became a cult sensation and a phenomenon, and after it was released on DVD, it sold 13 million DVDs, which paid for twice the budget. Because if you factor in a DVD costs about $20 a pop, times 13 million, that's $260 million.
Plus, every dude in college has a poster of Fight Club in their dorm room.
Yeah, so it became a cult classic, and I think obviously one of the main reasons why the film didn't do well theatrically is because of bad press, especially from Rosie O'Donnell, who used to have her own talk show. And on the day of Fight Club's release, she spoke about Fight Club on her show. And she hated the movie so much that she absolutely tore it apart. And she told all of her viewers to not watch it. And she even gave away the famous twist on her talk show on live television, saying that Tyler Durden was actually the narrator the whole time.
The day it came out.
The day it came out. It's one thing to not like a movie, but to ruin the twist of a movie, it's pretty unfair when you factor in all the people that worked hard to make that movie. So I think it was a pretty irresponsible thing for her to do.
That's what happens when some people get power, man. They use it horribly.
Yeah. And also the marketing of this film was actually drastically different in tone than the film itself, because when the movie was done, the producers were like, what is this movie? We don't know how to market this. And so David Fincher had a plan, but they rejected his plan of marketing. Instead, they focused on the idea that this movie stars Brad Pitt and there's fighting in it. And so most people thought this movie was about just like an underground boxing movie with Brad Pitt in it. So they had no idea what the real movie and story and theme was really about.
Yeah, how do you market a movie that the entire plot is a satire on consumerism and marketing?
I don't know. It's tough.